This is your host, Danny, and this is a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Today's episode is all about vocabulary building, and as usual, we're going to read something, we're going to talk about a topic, and from this topic, we're going to learn 10 new words in context. Our context or our story for today is about street art. And the words we're going to learn in today's episode are ensue, scourge, aegis, wield, remunerative, amnesty, ravage, hue, refine, and illustrious. So, you're interested? Of course you are. These are new words and we're going to learn about street art. But before we start, let me remind you that you can practice everything you're going to learn in this episode on my website. There is a custom post I created for this episode. You can find it. The link is in the description of the episode. Take the link and take your English to the next level. And of course, I will have to remind you that English Plus Podcast is a free podcast. You can enjoy it as much as you would like. But if you would like to contribute, if you would like to support English Plus, support me, there are two links in the description of the episode. One will take you to my Patreon page, and the other one if you would like to make a one-time donation to my Buy Me a Coffee page. So without further ado, let's start talking about street art and learn 10 new words in context. With the rapid spread of industry and the ensuing transformation of the urban landscape, city dwellers have found themselves living in increasingly bleak surroundings. Graffiti writers, in their attempts to adorn the bare walls of their environment, have become the scourge of politicians and police. Under the aegis of neighborhood planning boards and even some mayors, however, what was once vandalism is now being converted into community art. Many wall riders, tired of wielding spray paint cans and dodging police, have, on their own, branched into safer and more remunerative forms of art. Some have redirected their efforts from buildings, bridges, and fences to t-shirts, theatrical stage sets, and compact disc covers. Others have adapted their messages to advertising, gracing the walls of commercial establishments with graffiti-style signs. It is the amnesty programs for graffiti writers that have been most successful at turning eyesores into art. In many large cities, former scrollers now work to beautify the walls they once ravaged. Part government agency, part social service organization, and part art workshop, each group paints its town in rich hues while learning discipline, responsibility, and cooperation. The street artists begin by obtaining the necessary permission to use unsightly fences, abandoned buildings, and blank walls as the canvases for astonishing murals. They seek ideas from local residents so that the paintings will reflect neighborhood heritage and values. Hours of effort are required to turn a vision into reality. Once the design conception is refined, graffiti writers and neighborhood volunteers erect a scaffold, scrape and whitewash the surface, and create a grid for the sketch. Professional artists may be hired to transfer the design to the larger surface, but it is the ex-wall writers and members of the community who add the color and the detail to exotic tropical gardens, portraits, or illustrious sports stars and memorable scenes from history. Each of the murals is a treasured asset and a source of pride for its neighborhood. Like giant postcards of living museum walls, these murals carry a message that everyone can understand. By channeling the talents of graffiti artists into community art, color triumphs over drabness in constructive self-expression. So, that was our story about street art. Very interesting how you can turn something that was illegal in the past, and it is still illegal just to do it without permission, but you turn this thing into art. You turn it from vandalism to beautification of the city. And that was about street art. But now for the most important part of our episode, the 10 new words we're going to learn in context. Let me remind you again, these words are ensue, scourge, aegis, wield, remunerative, amnesty, ravage, hue, refine, and illustrious. Let me start with the very first word, ensue, E-N-S-U-E. How did we use that in context? We said, with the rapid spread of industry and the ensuing transformation of the urban landscape, city dwellers have found themselves living in increasingly bleak surroundings. What do we mean by ensuing? If something ensues, that means it happens immediately after another event, and usually it's the result of this event. So that is the meaning of ensuing transformation. The rapid spread of industry, the ensuing transformation, this transformation happened after the rapid spread of industry, and it was the result of this rapid spread, the ensuing transformation. All right? That was our first word. What about the second word? Scourge. S-C-O-U-R-G-E. How did we use this word in context? We said graffiti writers, in their attempts to adorn the bare walls of their environment, have become the scourge of politicians and police. So what does it mean to become the scourge of someone like politicians and police? A scourge is something that causes a lot of trouble or suffering to a group of people, like a curse, like the affliction, like the bane. That is the meaning of scourge. They become the scourge of politicians and police. They had a lot of troubles from politicians and police. They suffered a lot from these two. And that is the meaning of scourge. But then we come to another word that is kind of the opposite. The aegis, A-E-G-I-S. That is our next word. We said under the aegis of neighborhood planning boards and even some mayors, however, what was once vandalism is now being converted into community art. So what does that mean? When something that is done under the aegis of a person or organization, that means it is done with their official support and backing, like when we talk about patronage or sponsorship or something like that. Under the aegis, that is the expression. Under the aegis of neighborhood planning, here we said, but of course we can say under the aegis of anybody or any group or organization or something like that. Under the support, under the patronage, under the sponsorship, that's the meaning. All right? That is another new word you can add to your active vocabulary bank. But that's not everything for today. We still have a couple more words to talk about. And our next word is wield. It's W-I-E-L-D. Wield. How did we use this word in context? We said many wall riders, tired of wielding spray paint cans and dodging police, have, on their own, branched into safer and more remunerative forms of art. So, here, wielding spray paint. What does that mean? If you wield a weapon, but it doesn't have to be a weapon all the time. Of course, spray paint cans are not exactly weapons, except for being intellectual weapons, but that's not the point. You can wield a weapon or a tool or a piece of equipment. And if you wield a weapon, tool, or piece of equipment, you carry and use this weapon, piece of equipment, or tool. So to wield spray paint cans, that means to carry them and use them. That's the meaning of wielding here. But don't forget that we can use wield for other things as well, especially weapons. And within the same example, we talked about another word that I would like to shed light on, and that is remunerative. Let me remind you how we use that. We said many wall riders, tired of wielding spray paint cans and dodging police, have on their own branched into safer and more remunerative forms of art. What does that mean, remunerative forms of art? When you talk about something remunerative, especially if it is work, that means you get paid to do. You are paid for this kind of work. Remunerative, that is profitable, lucrative, paying. That is the meaning of remunerative. And by the way, we spelled remunerative R-E-M-U-N-E-R-A-T-I-V-E. Remunerative. So it is simply profitable, paying. And now what about the next word, amnesty? A-M-N-E-S-T-Y. How do we use that word in context? We said it is the amnesty programs for graffiti writers that have been most successful at turning eyesores into art. Well, what does that mean, the amnesty programs? An amnesty is an official pardon granted to a group of prisoners by the state. Well, here, obviously, it's not prisoners. Graffiti writers are not prisoners, or were not prisoners at the time, not all of them anyway, but they were considered to be kind of criminals, or at least felons. So here, this was a kind of a general pardon for this group. pardoning this group, and that helped a lot, changing them from creators of eyesores around the city to creators of art around the city. So that is the meaning of amnesty. And now let's talk about the next word, ravage, R-A-V-A-G-E. How do we use that word in context? We said in many cities, former scrawlers, and here we're talking about graffiti writers, now work to beautify the walls they once ravaged. So they once ravaged these walls, but now they are beautifying these walls. So what does it mean to ravage something? It simply means to destroy. When you say a town, country, or economy that has been ravaged, that means it has been damaged so much that it is almost completely destroyed. That is the meaning of ravage. So simply to devastate, to destroy. So before, when they were hunted by the law, they used to ravage walls. But now, because they can be legal, they are beautifying the walls instead of ravaging them. So that is our word ravage. We still have 3 more words, don't go away. We still have hue, refine, and illustrious. Let me start with hue. How did we use that word in context? We said part government agency, part social service organization, and part art workshop. Each group paints its own in rich hues while learning discipline, responsibility, and cooperation. So what do we mean by hue? By the way, hue is H-U-E, hue. It's simply a color. A color, a tone, a shade of a color, that's fine. But that is the meaning of hue. So here we said in rich hues, like we're saying in rich colors. But of course, we can see hues here. First, it's another word you can use so you don't have to use color all the time. And it's a more sophisticated word to use. So, as I always say, you're just adding more power to your active vocabulary bank. Your arsenal of words is getting bigger. So that is the word hue. Now, let's move on to the next word, refine. R-E-F-I-N-E. How do we use that in context? We said, once the design conception is refined, graffiti writers and neighborhood volunteers erect a scaffold, scrape and whitewash the surface, and create a grid for the sketch. So, here we're focusing on refined, of course. What does that mean? If something, such as a process, a theory, or machine is refined, it is improved by having small changes made to it. But these changes are what makes it perfect, what makes it improved, like to polish something, to make it perfect. R-E-F-I-N-E, to refine. All right? That is the meaning of refine. And maybe that is just the thin line between just drawing and art. If it is not refined, it is not art. But here, it is refined. Obviously, it is refined. So it changed graffiti from just being an eyesore to a form of urban art. Or, as we call it, street art. Now for our final word for today's episode, illustrious. I-L-L-U-S-T-R-I-O-U-S. Illustrious. How do we use that in context? We were talking about examples of what can be drawn on these walls. We said professional artists may be hired to transfer the design to the larger surface, but it is the ex-wall writers and members of the community who add the color and the detail to exotic tropical gardens, portraits, or illustrious sports stars and memorable scenes from history. So when we talk about illustrious sports stars, what does that mean? Are we talking about people who are not known? Are we talking about obscure people that nobody knows about? They were great, but nobody knows about. On the contrary, we're talking about very famous, great, celebrated sports stars. So that is the meaning of illustrious. If you describe someone as an illustrious person, you mean that they are extremely well known because they have a high position in society or they have done something impressive. That is why we call them, or we use the word illustrious to describe them. And with that word, we come to the last word for today's episode and 10 new words you can add to your active vocabulary bank. Don't forget that you can practice every single thing you learned in today's episode on my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. If you just follow the link, that will take you to a custom post I created specifically for this episode for you to practice. Because remember, if you don't practice the words that you learned here, you will forget them very soon. But after you practice them, you will make sure that you will have added them permanently to your active vocabulary bank. And that is the whole point, right? So take the link and take your English with it to the next level. And don't forget to support English Plus. There are also 2 other links in the description that will take you to my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee pages so that you can contribute and help the show go on. And there's one last thing, of course. There are also links in the description of the episode that will take you to my books, to my vocabulary building books. Take the links, take a look at the books, see some samples of what these books are like, and you can decide to buy them on Amazon. They're also available on Amazon. With that being said, that'll be everything for today's episode. Thank you very much. This is your host, Danny. I will see you next time.